Alright, what's up everyone? I just wanted to make a quick little update video for my K4V2 chassis. Gonna go over some of the questions that you guys had, as well as talk about some of the new bits that I've made for it. Because that's right, it is now updatable with some new parts. So first of all, what I want to show you is the fact that you can now fully unscrew this bottom part and it slides right off. Which, if you had the previous chassis, you would know that that's impossible, because this old speaker module was wider. Actually, I can show it to you. It was wider than the rest of the chassis, so that when you took this bottom part off, it would take this with it. And the reason I made it like this originally was so that it covered the side contacts here, but I've now made an alternate version which has the side contacts of the speakers exposed, so that you can get this whole thing a little bit thinner, and the speaker fits perfectly on the top of it, just like that. And what I've done with this piece that's different is I have put hot glue in the sides just to seal it, to stop any unwanted pressure problems behind the speaker, which improves the loudness and also improves the bass response of the speaker. Still magnetizes on the same way, like that. So that is the new speaker. I will probably have both options available on my Shapeways store. So if you want to mix and match between the two, you know, the one that is a little bit easier to assemble compared to the one that's a little bit easier to use after the fact. So I'll leave that choice up to you guys. So one of the things you might have noticed is that it now has the stock bubble strip PCB on here, and I will show you guys how that attaches now. So let's undo the buttons. So with the buttons out, if you slide the whole clamp about halfway down, you'll see there is some wires coming out here. And if you pull that off, you might recognize this is the connector aligner piece on my Shapeways store, and it is used for the little hole at the top here to make sure that you're plugging in the NeoPixel strip the right way and you don't fry it like I did with my last one. So that's why that's on there. So the way that I've assembled that is with the little clamp PCB here. I've soldered my 3 wires, I've twisted them together with a drill, and I've put a little dab of hot glue over the solder connections there, just so that the connections are protected and they're less likely to pull off. And then what I've done is I've made the wire go back and then come round like this, and then put the clamp in from the bottom here like this, so that it wraps kind of around the bar that goes in the middle between the 2 clamp parts here. So this can come out a little bit, but when you push the clamp over it, there's enough slack in there to hide the wire in between the 2 clamp bars. So that's how the new clamp bit works. So if you were wondering what the connector aligner was for, that's what it's for. So there you go. So moving on to the actual chassis now, there's not a lot about it that's changed, apart from you can see that I have now properly insulated the Profi board, which I would recommend doing considering you're sliding this over it, which I believe is steel, and you don't want to short out any of the contacts on the Profi. So what I thought I'd do as well is I'd kind of answer a couple of wiring questions that you guys have had since I've posted this chassis, and a couple of you have been getting it. So one of the main questions that I've seen is talking about how all of the positive aspects of this work. So what I did in my chassis is all of the positives from these 3 NeoPixels here, for example, the crystal chamber, the little side accent, and even this one. All of those are all wired to this PCB, because all 5 of the positive pins on this PCB are internally bridged. And I believe it's a lot neater to take all of your positive wires up to a NeoPixel PCB like that, and solder those all together up there, rather than just having a clump in some heat shrink tubing. So that's what I've done. That's what I've done with this build. I mean, you guys can do it any different way you like. But another thing I've done is I've put most of my resistors for the data lines are up here. So there is a resistor for the main blade, because I've actually put my main blade on data 2, and I'll get to why I've done that in a second. And then data 3, I believe I've hooked up to the side PCB here. Data 4, I believe, is the crystal chamber, and then data 1 I've set as these accent LEDs. And the reason I've done that is because you've got 2 groups of LEDs are in this lower half, so these and the crystal chamber, and then the other 2 groups of LEDs are technically up here because they're through the pipes. So this connector and this connector are both on the upper half of the chassis. And the reason I've put 2 resistors up here is to save a little bit of space in the lower half of the chassis down here, because there's not a lot of space considering that there is actually a Bluetooth module under there. It kind of sits about the mid-level here. So you put the kind of metal part of the Bluetooth module facing down underneath the Profi board. So it's in there. You can't see it at all from the outside, so it's completely hidden away, but it is under there. But yeah, like I said, there's not a lot of space in this lower half. So I've moved one of the resistors up to this top side to kind of save on a bit of space, which I thought was really helpful. So something else that I've also seen talked about is how these buttons are done. And what I've done for the buttons here is I've actually drilled a 2mm hole in the side of the brass pipes here, and I've used black wire to just kind of take the 2 contacts of these buttons and feed them into the wire. So you barely really notice that there's any wires there. But it does mean that the buttons are used properly, and there's not basically minimal exposed wiring for the buttons there. And speaking of buttons, something that I've done on the top of the chassis itself is I'm now using both of the large buttons that come with the K4V2. And what I've done is in the chassis, I've made it so that, I don't know if you can see, but the 2 button PCBs here sit at different heights, and that's so that you can use the small button with the top button PCB here. But if you decide to go this route and use the 2 large buttons like I have, which makes it a lot easier to unscrew this top button, what I've done is I have sanded the bottom of the button a little bit so that it's a little bit more grippy, and then I have super glued. It's a bit of a weird solution to do this, but I've super glued one of the magnets that I used on this bottom part here. So this is the same magnet, and I've super glued a magnet on top of here to kind of extend the reach of the button, and this magnet seemed to be the perfect difference in height to still press that button consistently. So if you want to use 2 large buttons, then there you go, there is your solution. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just quickly with this connector. When you're wiring this up, there is a hole kind of about here in the top half, and that is how you get to this connector. If you need to, you can kind of drill this with a hand, like manual drill, I guess you'd call it. You kind of drill at this angle to get to this connector in there. And then you can take the wires from this and you can wire them up there. So the negative comes up through here, down here to the Profi board. The positive is bridged at the top here, and the data has the resistor up here, and then also comes down the pipe after the resistor. Final thought, I've heard a lot of people struggle getting the wires down from these pipes into the Profi section. And the way that I did that for my build was I believe I took a 3mm drill bit, and you've got to kind of, without the Profi in there, you've got to kind of drill into the cavities at about a 45-degree angle. I'll put a kind of CAD drawing on the screen now, kind of showing you where the holes are meant to be, but they kind of get filled in a little bit by the Shapeways print, so they're not always fully successful. But yeah, so if you drill those holes out, it should really help you, as well as drilling out the hole in here so that your Allen wrench can fit properly. And yeah, I think that covers most of what's new. Apart from, I'm now offering these covers in polished brass, if you guys are interested. But yeah, that is kind of everything that is new as an update to this chassis. I hope you guys like the changes that I've done, and hopefully that answers a few questions that you might have had. And yeah, can't wait to see you guys build this.